Welcome to Halacha in a Year, where we can get to learn all the most relevant halacha through the prism of the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. You are listening to Rabbi Ya'akov Trump. This year is kindly sponsored by the Moshe Group and CA in zechus of Rivka Biela, bas נחמה שיפרה, and in honor of Rabbi Trump. The halachas we're going to be learning today are the halachas of Ikar and Tafel, which literally means the primary and the secondary in halacha. This is Siman Nun Daled, this 54th chapter in the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. We're going to look at three basic concepts. Concept number one is two food items eaten together, then two ingredients in the same entity, and number three is added elements as well. So let's jump straight in. The basic halacha is like this: if I have an ikar and a tafel, I'm eating two things together, and one is the primary, one is the secondary. I say a bracha on the primary, and I don't say a bracha on the secondary. Ikar, the primary, means to say that one's intention is to consume the food for this reason, and if it were not for this, I wouldn't eat it, and I wouldn't eat the other thing as well. So this is why I'm eating it. That's considered the ikar. So a few basic questions. Let's jump straight in. Does one need a bracha achrona on the tafel, on the secondary? The answer is no. The secondary loses its bracha rishona and its bracha achrona, the first and last bracha. It is considered subsumed in the bracha of the ikar. What happens if I eat the two things at different times? So, I will only say that the bracha on the ikar, on the main one, will eclipse or include the bracha on the tafel, on the secondary, if they are eaten together and one's mind was on eating the tafel when eating the ikar. But if the tafel was eaten first, the secondary was eaten first, or it was eaten at a different sitting, then it would require its own bracha. What's an example? So let's say one wants to drink wine, but one doesn't want to drink on an empty stomach. So one has a small something to eat, a cracker, a fruit beforehand, in order not to eat on the empty stomach. Clearly, the food is a tafel. It is secondary to the fact that I'm having this meal right now. However, because I'm having it first, it's considered a tafel before the ikar and would require its own bracha. Therefore, it is best to, in this case, which leads to the next question, is what bracha would that get? So there's a debate as to whether it gets its own bracha as its tafel before the ikar, or if it would, because it's considered tafel and it's before the ikar, it would be resh she'akol, because it's considered as if not its own self. Being as that's the case, the Kitzur suggests having just a drop of wine to say the Brei Priya Geffen first, just before it, then have it, and then continue with the drinking of the wine. What if both items were ones I wanted to eat? So then this is not Ikar and Tafel. Therefore, they would both eat a bracha. So what's an example of this? If I want to have coffee and cake, we don't say the coffee or the cake is the Ikar or the Tafel. We say I want both of them, and therefore each of them would require their own bracha. Let's move on to the next topic, which is two ingredients. This is very common. What happens if I have two ingredients which are mixed together? It's mushed together into my meal. So in this case, you would have to look at what is the majority, and whatever the majority is, that becomes the ikar. What happens if the minority is a grain product? So in this case, we say that mezonos is not botel, is not considered secondary, and therefore would get a mezonos even if the minority shareholder in this substance is a grain product. What happens if I have two ingredients which are mixed together but they're not mushed together? So for instance, a salad. And let's say I have different bracha types. Most salads have the same bracha type, which is ha'adama. But let's say I have craisins in that salad. Let's say I have tangerines in the salad. Let's say I have pieces of chicken in the salad. There's or feta cheese, obviously a different salad. But the point is that I have something else which is a different class of bracha in my salad. So what's the halacha? So the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch says that each one gets its own bracha because they are distinguishable. They're not mushed together. Now, this is the opinion of the Chai Adam, which is one of the sources of where the Kitzur gets his psak from. However, it's worthwhile noting that the Mishabura says that that if they're eaten together, one does go after the majority, and the minority would not require its own bracha as well. This, of course, is assuming that one eats it kaf achas, meaning to say, I put my spoon in, I put my fork in, and I eat whatever comes up with it. But if I'm the kind of person who likes to eat my salads, where I have a little bit of this, and then I eat the cheese here, and then I eat the chicken there, obviously separate salads, or I eat the fruit now, then obviously you show that each of them are important, and therefore would require its own bracha. The idea of going after the majority would only be true if I don't really care what it is that I eat, I'm just eating it all together, according to the Mishnah Berurah. And finally, we'll build down to our last concept, which is added elements. So let's look at a few examples. What happens if I added milk or soup to my dish of food? So generally speaking, the liquid is considered tafel, is considered secondary, and therefore require no bracha. But what happens if I want to drink the soup or milk, and the other thing is really just ancillary? So like I'm adding soup nuts. Then the soup or the milk is the ikar, and the other one would not require its bracha. What happens if I want both? So let's say I do like to eat the soup nuts by themselves. I do like to have the other item that's in it. So in this case, it would require 2 brachas. The best is always to say a bracha on the solid first and then the liquid second. What about majority? Don't we go after majority? So in this case, no, because these are 2 distinguishable items, and therefore we do not go after the majority. What about cereal and milk? So Rav Moshe Feinstein points out that cereal is considered the Ikar and the milk is considered the Tafel, which would mean that let's say I'm having my cereal and I pour my milk. I don't say a shehakol on the milk. Obviously, if I'm drinking water or orange juice, I would on that. But then that would mean to say even if I drink the milk afterwards, I don't need to say a bracha on it because it's considered Tafel to that original cereal as well. However, if I'm adding a lot more milk, because I like to drink the milk at the end, that's my intention, then it would not be tafel and would require its own shehakol as well. What about fruit added to cereal? One slices up strawberries or bananas for one cereal. In that case, they're considered important by themselves, and they're distinguishable, so they would need their own bracha. What about added sugar? Let's say one's having oatmeal, one adds sugar, so that's considered tafel, does not require its own bracha, you just say borei min mezonos. What about chicken soup and matzah balls? So matzah balls are need their own bracha. They're mezonos, generally speaking, and then if one eats the soup independently afterwards, then it would get its own bracha of shehakol. What about ground spices and mixed sugar? So the spices are considered the ikar, and on this note, the Kitzur points out that nutmeg is ha'etz, cinnamon is ha'adama, and ginger is ha'adama, because these are a lot of things which are often mixed with sugar. What if I'm drinking olive oil? So drinking olive oil is considered detrimental to one's health, therefore it requires no bracha. One should not be drinking it. What if I'm having it with other things? So it's usually tafel to those things. So just imagine where we use oil. Oil is used for cooking and it's used in salads. In those situations, obviously it is the tafel, and I'd say the bracha on the other thing that it is being used with. What happens if I'm drinking it for medicine? So apparently it has medicinal properties, and if it is recommended to be drunk for medicinal properties, and I add spices to it to make it more palatable, is borei priya eitz, that other things are mixed in or considered the tafel. What happens if I'm drinking a drink and I add other things to the drink for medicinal purposes? So for instance, I add in ginger into my tea as an example. I grinded up something which has got medicinal properties. So it depends. It depends on the intent. If I'm drinking this for thirst, then it's considered shehakol, and the additional items are tafel to it, or tfelim to it. If it is for medicine, then it's borei peri, whatever I added. Let's say the ginger, borei peri adama, and the juice is tafel, but it requires understanding what the main intent over here as well. What about fruit preserved in honey? So the fruit is considered the ikar, the honey is considered the tafel, and we would not say a bracha on the honey. With this we conclude a lot of the halachas of ikar and tafel. There are so many different permutations of this. This requires a little bit of careful thought and intention, which is the goal of halacha. The goal of the Torah system is to allow us to understand what we're doing, to live life properly, intentionally, and contextualized as well. What am I doing? What am I eating? And why? Have a wonderful and meaningful